Okay, so we ended the segment 2 first video on this slide. This is now the second video, so it's just going to go into a few minutes. It won't be very long, I promise. Okay, how fossils form, if you've ever wondered. Most form in what's called sedimentary rock. You learned that in middle school. The rock formed when it was exposed to rain and heat and wind and the cold, and breaks down the existing rock into smaller particles of sand, silt, and clay. That's the real light stuff that's at the bottom of a lake or the ocean. The particles carried away by the water, and it settles at the bottom. So as things die, they kind of get buried in that light silt clay, and so it actually nicely preserves them in the layers of the sediment. Okay, chemical processes. Water goes in, dissolves out the living tissue, and converts it into mineral rock. Okay, so the fossils do not have DNA in them. They've been converted. All the living tissue, or the once alive tissue, has been converted into minerals. It's areas where there's like lots of snow, and areas where there's not much water flow or whatever, where you can actually get some DNA tissue. But fossils, there's no DNA. The fossil record is incomplete. There are many holes, but even so, we have a couple of techniques that will allow us to somewhat determine when the fossils were, when the organisms that now are fossil were alive, okay? When they died, like when they laid to rest, we have an idea of the time of that. And one method is relative dating. You're not going to date your aunt or your cousin or anything like that. We're not talking about that. But relative dating is, okay, if this fossil is found in the third layer down, it is more recent than the fossils that are below that fossil. Okay, so the age of fossils determined by comparing its placement with that of fossils in other layers. Okay, so the fossils actually occur in a very particular order based on sedimentation. Okay, radioactive dating is a little bit more specific. It's going to calculate the pretty close to approximate age that the fossil is based on the remaining radioactive isotopes it contains. And in chemistry, you learned a little bit about that. You're not going to be asked a lot about it here on this test, but you did learn about those before. Radioactive dating, some elements in rocks are radioactive. They break down, and so they put out radiation. The half-life is the length of time required for half of that radioactive atom in the sample to actually decay. And there's a nice little visual here. You can pause the video and look through it if you cannot remember that, learning that in chemistry. There's something called the geologic time scale, and that is what paleontologists use to look at evolutionary time. Okay, it was developed by studying the rock layers and the fossils within those rock layers and kind of pieced together. And it shows that different fossils are found in different rock layers. Looking large scale though, macroevolution, this is looking at large scale patterns and processes that occur over very large periods of time. So there are 6, I believe, that I've listed. So extinction, large scale, species died out. Okay, and you may have heard of the dinosaur extinction and all of that, but there have been a handful of extinctions, mass extinctions, that have occurred on our planet, believe it or not. Adaptive radiation, also called divergent evolution. Divergent is diving away from each other. Okay, so it's getting more and more different. So if you know and understand evolution is change over time, this is when a small group of species have evolved into very different forms that live in very different ways. Divergent. And this is a great example of Darwin's finches. One common ancestor, and then as nature selected differently in different environments, we have all of these species that now exist that are very different from one another as far as how they look and what they eat and how they behave. Convergent, on the other side, the opposite of divergent is convergent, coming together. Okay, this is when unrelated organisms come to resemble one another. So a great example would be, I don't know if this is a great example or not, but like bats having wings as well as birds having wings. They both have wings to allow them to move through the air. Coevolution, this is when two species actually evolve together, you know, with each other because of a relationship they have together. So a beautiful example is bees and the flowers that they pollinate. Okay, they will evolve together. There's some brilliant examples of moths that have their proboscis, the little tube thing in their mouth part, that is just the exact length, for example, as an orchid whose nectar is at the flower is really long and skinny, and the moth's proboscis is the exact same length to reach down the inside of that flower interior and capture that nectar. So they literally are so specific that that moth is the only one. I don't have a good picture of it, I'm sorry, but that moth is the only one that exists, that species, that will pollinate that specific species of flower. Literally, they need each other. That's a great coevolution example. Punctuated equilibrium. This is when there's a pattern of long, stable periods interrupted by brief periods of a more rapid change. And then gene expression is the changes in the genes like mutations, and these are only passed on through the gametes. We mentioned that earlier. And that is it, you guys. Short and sweet on this one.